you? Who are you? Who are you? Hello and welcome to the Who Are You podcast with me, Deborah Bamford from Progressive Heads Global Limited. If you've often questioned who you are, and I suspect you will have at some point, or you will do in the future, then join me to explore who you are from a number of different perspectives. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Who Are You podcast. I'm Deborah Bamford, and today we're going to be talking about metaprograms. Now, what if knowing more about your personality type, or in neuro-linguistic programming talk, metaprograms, what if that could help you gain self-awareness and help you understand problems with the behavior that you might have? And when I'm talking about behavior, I'm not talking about really bad behavior when we're talking about children. I'm talking about your actions, the things that you do. That's behavior. What if you could unlock insights into human behavior and also improve your personal growth and development? What about if you could navigate social interactions more effectively because you would be able to recognize and respond to certain metaprograms? That'd be fabulous, wouldn't it? So what are metaprograms? In episode 1, I talked about us all creating our own reality or model of the world, which is totally unique in comparison to anyone else's model of the world. And if you remember, and I'll just share the screen so it does remind you if you're watching, and if you're listening, you'll be able to remember this anyway. If you remember, in episode 1, we talked about having between 2 and 11 million bits of information coming in through our 5 senses. And that's 2 to 11 million bits of information per second coming in through our 5 senses. Now, I know there's a lot of you that will say, oh, Debs, this is why I'm overwhelmed, because there's so much information coming in. Go and listen to episode 1, where I explain a little bit more about it. I'm briefly going over it today. So what happens is every single second, we delete, distort, and generalize all of that information through our filters. And what we're left with on the other side is just 126 bits of information per second. Now, what we see on the other side, once it's gone through all of our filters, that's our own illusion. That's our reality. That's our model of the world. So I thought it'd be really exciting today to go through the metaprogram filter with you, because the metaprogram filter, it plays a big part in how we distort and generalize the information that comes through to us and also delete it. And metaprograms can offer valuable insights into our own thought processes, our own communication styles, and our own behavior. And also that of others, of course. So if you've taken some kind of personality test, whether that's an online personality test, one that you've done with someone else, maybe it's even one of those quizzes that you get online that determines your personality. If you've taken any kind of personality in the past, you'll often be left with either a label of what you are, or you'll be left with a few letters and some description of how you think, communicate, and behave within that category of having that label or those letters. Now, remember what I said in episode 1 about labels. Whenever there's a description and a meaning given to a label, that meaning is the important thing that's there, because anything that's a meaning can be changed. So it's up to you when you read the descriptions of yourself whether you find those meanings, those findings as superpowers, or do you find those meanings excuses for what you don't do? Or what you do that's not particularly helpful. And what often happens is that quite often we'll find reasons and excuses for being the way that we are, whether it's helpful to us or not. So I don't know about you, but I love a bit of history. So I thought I'd give you a bit of background knowledge to meta programs within the NLP world. So the concept of meta programs has been developed and explored within the field of NLP for a long time, for about 50 years, actually. It's important to note that there isn't a single inventor or researcher associated with the entire concept. The basis of meta programs is based largely on Carl Jung's work back in the 20s, and that was later continued by Isabel Briggs Myers. Now, you might notice that combination, but in the opposite way round, because it was Isabel Briggs Myers that created the Myers-Briggs type indicator, or you might know it as the MBTI test. When Richard Bandler and John Grinder, the co-founders of NLP, started to look at the MBTI test, and they were looking at who was excellent in the world of human excellence. What they did when they developed meta programs, they did that as part of their work on modeling human excellence. Now, over time, students of Bandler and Grinder, and further down the line, who have become practitioners and trainers of NLP, such as Leslie Cameron Bandler, Michael Hall, Wyatt Woodsmall, and Tad James, they further explored and refined the concept of meta programs. What they did was conduct further research, develop their own models, and provided practical applications for understanding and utilizing meta programs for personal and professional contexts. In NLP, what we want to find out is how we do what we do, why we do what we do, and what we do as a result of the how and the why. So the meta program model that I'm going to discuss with you today is from this book. And this is by Wyatt Woodsmall and Tad James. It's Timeline Therapy and the Basis of Personality. And it's the basis of personality information on meta programs that I'm going to discuss with you today. Now, in this episode, there are so many meta programs. In fact, there's 4 main meta programs and about 20 complex meta programs within this model. And to discuss all of those would be massive in one podcast. And I want to keep these podcasts as short as I can, because I know the shorter they are, the longer you will listen. So I'm going to discuss the 4 main meta programs today. And they're the 4 ones that you'll relate to the MBTI test, and you'll also figure out which ones combined influence how you think, feel, and behave. Now, to find out someone's meta programs, yes, we do ask questions. And yet in the NLP world, we know that listening to the tone and the way that somebody answers the question, and also combining that with observing the behavior of the person who we're asking the questions to, will give us a greater understanding of where on the scale and which answer is the true answer for the people that we're working with. The MBTI test, for example, uses roughly 25 questions to determine each of the 4 main meta programs. And I know that you might be thinking that asking 25 questions might be much more accurate than asking just one. And yet, this is why in NLP we observe behavior and listen to the language and the tone that's being used. So it would be easy for me to ask you right here, right now on this podcast, to determine your meta program for external behavior. And the question that I'd ask is, when it's time to recharge your batteries, do you prefer to be alone or with people? Now, you've got to answer that question there and then, whichever answer pops up in your head the first, without you, what I call Tinder swiping an answer away. Whatever pops up first, that's your unconscious mind answering, and that's the correct answer for you. So those of you that prefer to be alone, you might be labeled introverted, and you may prefer the internal world of thoughts and ideas over the external world of people and things. An introverted person will be more interested in the inner world of concepts, ideas, ideals. An introvert often likes to have a certain space or territory that they call their own. And most importantly, this is about recharging your batteries. So when you want to recharge your batteries, do you want to do that alone, or do you want to do that with people? And whatever your answer is determines the introvert extrovert, because the opposite end of the scale is the extrovert. Now, someone who likes to be with people when they're recharging their batteries, they prefer the outer world of people and things rather than the internal world of thoughts and ideas. So ultimately, when it's time to recharge their batteries, extroverts will want to be with people. In fact, they probably want to be at some kind of party or something like that. But extroverts will have a wider interest, and wider interests actually, as opposed to a depth of concentration, because extroverts prefer that interaction with other people. So they will have a breadth of friendships. It's also important to note when we ask these questions that any answer given is on some kind of sliding scale. And you may land anywhere on that sliding scale, depending on the context in which the person answering is at that moment in time and how they're filtering it through their other filters. And again, this is why in NLP we observe behavior and listen to the language and the tone that's being used. Now, for all the shades of grey in between, for example, if context was dependent, there will be those who say that if they've been on their own for some time, then to recharge, they want to spend time with people. And yet, if they've spent time with people, they want to recharge alone. There will also be those who equally enjoy their internal world of thoughts, concepts, and ideas, and enjoy the outer world of people, interests, and things. And yet, having said all of that, when answering the question at an unconscious level, there will be a preference of one over the other if answered at that unconscious level. So if you're overthinking the question and pondering whether you're more like one or the other, and contemplating the fact that you might like people or you may not, and sometimes you like being out and sometimes you don't, and sometimes you like being in your own world and ideas, if you're overthinking the question and spending more than 1 second on answering, you're answering the question consciously. And when you answer questions consciously, they may actually not align with the answer which is true to you. And I know that when you're feeling confused and you're feeling out of alignment, then that can discombobulate you. I love that. Do you? Now, the next question in the 4 main meta programs, this question determines your meta program for internal processes. Now, our internal processes are related to our attention and where we focus our attention. So the question for this is, and remember, whatever comes into your head first, that's your unconscious answer. If you were going to study a certain subject, would you be interested in A, the facts and their application for the now, or B, the ideas and relationships between facts and their applications for the future. So if you answered A and you're interested in the facts and their application for the now, then you'd have a sensor meta program. Now, a sensor probably prefers the practical facts of experience in life, the immediate. You think you're one of those down-to-earth types. You'll live for being in the now. With that may come a short-term memory. It may be that you're poor at planning and sticking to plans. Although, on the flip side of that, you'll probably be a really quick decision maker. You'll be energetic, active, and you'll often enjoy stimulating experiences. If you answered B, the ideas and relationships between facts and their applications for the future, your meta program will be that of an intuitor. Now remember, this is the opposing end of the scale, and with sensor at the opposite end. So as an intuitor, you'll prefer to perceive the possibilities, perceive the relationships and the meanings of all of your experiences. You probably prefer abstract ideas, and you may also disregard sensory data coming in within the now, because you prefer the big picture to the specific details, whereas a sensor likes the details. Intuitors often describe themselves as imaginative or ingenious, and yet they fail to notice what's going on in the now, because the intuitors are the poets, the dreamers, the visionaries. They dream of a world they would like to have in the future and constantly try to make today into what they've already envisioned for tomorrow. Unfortunately, intuitors have got no patience for doing the actual work of getting towards their dream, because they are so far into the future and dreaming up new plans that they forget to do the work in the now. Some intuitors on the extreme end may actually make no sense at all to those sensors that speak in real specifics, because an intuitor, their spoken word is in greater levels of abstract thinking. So it's almost like you have to go into outer space for a while to consider what's being said by an intuitor, because they sound like their language is from outer space. Remember that these are extreme ends of the scale. So between the extreme sensor and the extreme intuitor, there may be elements of both which overlap for you, and that's okay. Remember, we're always working on this sliding scale between one or the other. So what you will have is a little bit of a bias between one end or the other, even if there's an overlap. The third meta program that we're going to look at is the one that assesses the ability to access an internal state. Let me put my teeth back in for that one. So this meta program is to access the ability. No, let's go back. There's a lot of A's in this sentence. The meta program is to assess the ability to access an internal state. Let's say that again. It's to assess the ability to access an internal state or an internal emotion. So the question for this is, ask yourself, can you remember a work situation that gave you trouble, a one-time event? Now, this is one of those questions where if I was sitting with you, I'd be watching to see if you accessed your kinesthetic feelings or whether you accessed your self-talk and thinking. I'd be listening to the words to listen to find out if you use kinesthetic words or whether you used thinking words. And I'd be observing the tone of voice that you were using with the language that you were saying as well. So you have an idea today of who you may be, thinkers will use language like understand, processes, systems, lists. Thinkers love an Excel spreadsheet. And thinkers are often dissociated from things. So they make judgments and decisions objectively and impersonally without any emotional experience with that. When they're considering both the causes of events and where decisions may lead, they often believe in principles, policies, and laws because the thinker is a rational person. So they don't take into account how decisions that they make may matter to other people. Thinkers often perceive time as an objective fact, and they also know that it's something that's outside of themselves. To a thinker, what happened when is more important than what happened and why something happened. So a thinker is comfortable with facts, and yet they'll be so uncomfortable when it comes to speculating about something, unless there's data there for them to look at and make sense of. Feelers, on the other hand, will use emotional language. They'll make judgments or decisions subjectively and personally, because feelers weigh their value of their choices based on their past and how these values matter to the people around them. Feelers don't care about logic at all. They're more all about emotional decisions. And feelers often associate with the past, and they take time personally. And the past to them is somehow more real than the present or the future. They may even wish to have lived in the past, and quite often the future isn't real to them at all, because the past and the present seem to be the only reality for a feeler. So you'll recognize a feeler because when you're talking with them, they'll suddenly go, oh, this reminds me of a time when, yada, 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 and tell you a story about their past. Now, again, remember this is a continuum. So you may have noticed elements of the thinker that you identify with and elements of the feeler that you identify with. And that's because everything is on a sliding scale. So it's almost like you find yourself neither in one box or the other. Having said that, remember, however you answer the question, the first time you do it without overthinking, to determine your meta program, making that decision of what you're going to say straight away is the one where you will gain more awareness of self, because you'll be able to know whether you are further down the feeler scale or further down the thinker scale. And finally, for today's podcast, we're going to take a look at the meta program for adaptive response. Now, adaptive response is determining how people adapt to their environment. So you might be the type of person that goes through life aiming to understand life and adapt to it. Or you may be the type of person that wants to make life adapt to them. So let's see what the question is to find out what your adaptive response is. So if we were going to do a project together, would you prefer if it was outlined, planned, and orderly? Or would you prefer that we had a more flexible approach with the project? If you answered that you preferred that the project was outlined, planned, and orderly, then you would be in the judger end of the adaptive response scale. Now, judges, and that's judges with an R at the end, not judges as in a judge that sits in a court. Judges, they aim to regulate and control the events around them. And that's because they like to have control. They want to know what's happening a week of Friday and to have things settled and planned. They may even plan to the minute. They may even plan for years in advance. And also because they have a high need for closure, they may experience anxiety around not deciding something. The judger often likes to make lists and be organized. They'll have calendars and planners and anything to do with time management, because all of that is important to them. The opposite end of the scale are the perceivers. And a perceiver wants life to be flexible, spontaneous, and adaptable. A perceiver will take time to make decisions. And this is because they like the open-endedness of actually not having to make a decision at all, because they like to keep their options open. A perceiver may even read a number of books simultaneously and never complete any of them. A perceiver may experience anxiety actually around making a decision, because decisions in their eyes may reduce their options. Perceivers can often be impulsive, perform below their capacity, and that's because they need change, they need autonomy, they need to be open-minded. And again, you may notice some overlap between the judger and perceiver with how you think, feel, and behave. These 4 questions will have you acknowledge what your 4 major meta programs are. So we've got the introvert-extrovert meta program, we've got the sensor-intuitor meta program, we've got the thinker-feeler meta program, and we've got the perceiver and judger meta program. So which ones are you? Did you answer the questions? And did you answer them? Did you take the first answer that came up? Did you listen to the language that you were using yourself when you were either thinking about or feeling about the 3rd meta program that we talked about? You may notice, if you've done the Myers-Briggs test previously, that your answers match the answers that you did on the MBTI test. Or it may be that you've got a slight dissimilarity when you've answered these 4 questions. It's important to note that being at one end of the scale or the other is not finite of your experience of the world. It is right now, and yet any meta program is changeable. So if a meta program isn't working for you, then there are ways to change it. Because you see, personality is a changeable thing. It's not an actual thing, so it can change. Also remember, when you stick a label on something and give meaning to it, if the meaning is helpful to you and it works, keep it. That's okay. However, if the meaning that you gave to that label isn't helpful for you, then that's time to change. I wonder if you've ever heard the saying, and you probably have, treat people how you would like to be treated. As you've heard today, there are people that are opposite ends of the scales in all 4 of these meta programs. And these are just the major 4 meta programs. There are a number of complex meta programs. So actually, if we treat people how we would like to be treated, it may be not how they would like to be treated. So the key is to listen into what people are saying, listen to the language that they're using, look at the behavior that they're using, listen to the types of words that they use to figure out what meta program they may be, and then treat them the way that they want to be treated. Because if you're the type of person that uses lofty language and is out of space with the abstraction of the language that you use, and you're talking to someone who has no clue of abstract language and deals in specifics, then it's up to you to change your language to fit the other person. Now, I know that there will be some of you out there that will be saying, no, people need to change and adapt to us. In an ideal situation, in an ideal world, it would be wonderful if all of us knew these nuggets of knowledge that I've been giving you today and understood that it's an exchange and that if we adapt to each other, that will be really helpful. But as we've just talked about with the last meta program that we looked at, the adaptive response meta program, perceivers will be amazing at that. Judges, less so. So if you find yourself that you're a judger, then maybe it's time to figure out how to take on board some more of the perceiver aspects and start to think how you can adapt that will work for other people. If you found this interesting today, please leave a review. I love to find reviews and stars on the platforms that this podcast goes out to. And also, there are 2 ways that you could work with me to find out more. Learning about meta programs is one of the subject areas within our Quantum Progress Master Practitioner NLP Plus program. Before you do the Master Practitioner level, you need to have done the Progressive NLP Plus program, Powerful Progress NLP Plus program, because that's at practitioner level first. So if you're interested in meta programs, come and do our practitioner program and then go into the Master Practitioner program, where we will discuss this in much more detail than I have done today. And you'll be able to ask questions and change your meta programs if they're not working for you. Secondly, you can work directly with me on a one-to-one basis within my Meta Progress coaching package. This is where I take you through the whole questionnaire, the whole Meta Program questionnaire. I'll be looking at your behavior. I'll be listening to your answers. And what we'll do is compare the answers with where you are in your life and business and help you to make the changes possible to make the progress that you want to make in your life and business. So that's it for today. We've discussed the 4 main meta programs. And next time that I'll be doing an episode on my own, then we will discuss the complex meta programs. So join me in 2 weeks for the next episode of the Who Are You podcast. And I'll be interviewing a very special guest. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to the Who Are You podcast with me, Deborah Bamford. If you found this podcast interesting, supportive, fun, or you've liked it in some way, please leave me a review because that's a lovely thing to do. You can find me on Facebook as Debs Bamford, LinkedIn as Deborah Bamford, and Facebook, Insta, and TikTok as Coach Auntie Debs. See you next time. Thank you for listening to the Who Are You podcast with me, Deborah Bamford. If you found this podcast interesting, supportive, fun, or you've liked it in some way, please leave me a review because that's a lovely thing to do. You can find me on Facebook as Debs Bamford, LinkedIn as Deborah Bamford, and Facebook, Insta, and TikTok as Coach Auntie Debs. See you next time.